One of the deadliest missiles is the US Navy's Harpoon series of projectiles, the RGM-84A. The Harpoon is like a mini aircraft, as it is propelled by a powerful turbojet engine. It is fired from a canister or tube launcher. This missile was designed and built by McDonnell Douglas for the US Navy, and it was to have over-the-horizon capability and have all-weather ability. This version of the Harpoon has a range of 50 nautical miles. The Harpoon is a flexible weapon, and it can be fired from ships or submarines. The aircraft version is the AGM-84. Once launched, the missile descends and skims the wave tops. As it nears the target, the active search radar is initialized. It has waypoint ability and it can approach its target from any angle. In a combined attack, two missiles can approach the target from completely different angles. Harpoon can also navigate around landmass to acquire its target. Once locked on, the Harpoon missile can deliver its warhead by using the pop-up maneuver. In the final approach, the missile climbs sharply and approaches the target from directly overhead. It can also determine evasive action for anti-missile warfare, and that makes the Harpoon one very smart weapon. The missile is used on a wide variety of naval vessels, from the larger battleships down to the smaller patrol ships. And more than 15 navies throughout the world use it. The French equivalent of the American Harpoon is the French Exocet missile and is built by Eurospatial. This rocket-driven missile proved its worth for Argentina in the Falklands campaign, as it crippled or destroyed various British ships. It can be fired by aircraft, ship or submarine, and has a range of more than 26 miles. When launched, the missile will curve to attain the target and descends to near sea level. It is kept on course by its internal guidance platform and radar alternator. The ADAC adaptive radar commences operation when the Exocet comes within 6 miles of its target. The ADAC sweeps the area and acquires the target, steering the missile to impact with the target at optimum height above the waterline. The SM-39 is the submarine variant. The Exocet is launched with special containers from the submarine's torpedo tubes. The AM-39 is the air launch type. Over 100 Exocets were fired by Iraq during the Gulf War. Most versions of this missile have a Hexal light and steel block warhead and are designed to detonate after penetrating the hull of the target. These are some examples of the Exocet hit. Sea Dart is a surface-to-air missile system mounted on air defence destroyers of the Royal Navy. The weapon is powered by a combination of solid-fuel booster rocket, which is used for launching the missile, and simple ramjet, which gives it a speed of Mach 2. the missile is effective over a range of approximately 80 kilometres. Sea Dart entered service in 1967 on HMS Bristol, before becoming widespread on the Type 42 destroyers. The Sea Dart-equipped Type 42s are reaching the end of their service lives. The much more capable PAMS missile system will replace the Type 42 from 2007. The standard British air defence missile, the Sea Dart, is a semi-actively homing ramjet. The Sea Dart is credited with 7 aircraft shot down during the Falklands War. This is Royal Navy frigate Broadsword, and she's equipped with the Exocet missile for offensive action and Sea Wolf missiles for defence. Current deployment is on Type 22 and Type 23 frigates, the newer ships taking 32 missile silos. It is expected to remain in service until 2020. The Sea Wolf is a naval anti-missile missile and is designed as a final line of missile defence against both sea skimming and high-angle anti-ship missiles. It can also operate against aircraft. It has been used by the Royal Navy since 1979 and has been fired in anger during the Falklands War and the Persian Gulf conflicts. The manufacturers claim the missile can intercept targets as small as 114mm shells. BAC developed the system from a 1964 requirement. A contract was awarded in 1967 to BAC, Vickers and Bristol Aerojet. Testing lasted from 1970 until 1977. The Aegis Combat System, named for the mythological Aegis Shield, is a United States Navy weapons system. The first cruiser of this class was the Ticonderoga. This is not just a missile, it is a complete system, and was first tested on the Phantom, the 34 Firebee and the Sabre. This is the chief offensive and defensive missile of the US Navy fleet, and will remain so approximately until the year 2010. It can be used to destroy aircraft, cruise missiles and missile launch platforms. The computer-based command and decision element is the core of the Aegis Combat System. This interface makes the Aegis Combat System capable of simultaneous operation against a multi-mission threat: anti-air, anti-surface and anti-submarine warfare. The Navy built the first Aegis-equipped destroyers using the hull and machinery designs of Spruance-class destroyers. The heart of the system is an advanced automatic detect and track, multi-function, three-dimensional phased array radar. Known as the shield of the fleet, this high-powered radar is able to perform search, track and missile guidance functions simultaneously, with a track capacity of over 200 targets at more than 200 miles. Because the Aegis system dominates the ship architecture, ships equipped with it are sometimes mistakenly called Aegis-class ships. The early version was the Mark 26 dual-purpose launcher. This is the Mark 41 version, and 54 of these are fitted to the ships in environmentally sealed canisters. A key element of the system is the radar. Once fired, the missile will immediately turn towards its target.
Identified as 1 Alpha uniform.
The radars generate an enormous amount of information regarding so many targets and produce instant solutions. The Aegis-equipped vessels are probably the first vessels in history that cannot be swamped by incoming threats. In fact, nobody has yet been able to determine just how many targets Aegis system can track simultaneously.
Check manned battle stations missile. Manned battle stations missile, aye, sir.
Perhaps one of the deadliest missiles ever built is launched from under the sea. This is a ballistic missile submarine. These submarines were first deployed by the US Navy during 1960 and were armed with the Polaris intercontinental missile, and later the Poseidon. The latest version of this type of weapon is the Trident. The Trident missile is an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, and is armed with nuclear warheads. The Trident was built in two variants. The one, C4 UGM-93A, and two, D5 UGM-133A. The C4 and D5 designations put the missiles within the family that started in 1960, with Polaris A1, A2 and A3, and continued with the 1971 Poseidon C3. Ideally, the missile is sheathed in gas bubbles for its entire time in the water, so liquid never touches its fuselage. The launch from the submarine occurs below the ocean surface. The missiles are ejected from their tubes by gas pressure created by a gas generator, a solid fuel rocket motor attached to the bottom of the missile tube and exhausting into it. Both Trident versions are three-stage solid propellant inertially guided missiles, whose range is increased by an aerospike, a telescoping outward extension that halves frontal drag. After the missile leaves the tube and rises through the water over the submarine, the first stage motor ignites, the aerospike extends, and the boost stage begins. The Trident is carried by 14 active US Ohio-class submarines and 4 UK Vanguard-class submarines. The Tomahawk land attack missile is a long-range, all-weather subsonic cruise missile with stubby wings. Introduced by General Dynamics in the 1970s, it was designed as a medium to long-range, low-altitude missile that could be launched from a submerged submarine. It has been improved several times and is now made by Raytheon. There have been several variants employing several kinds of warheads. The operational versions include the unitary conventional land attack, TLAM-C, the bomblet dispensing land attack, TLAM-D, and the nuclear land attack, TLAM-A and TLAM-N. There is also the Tomahawk anti-ship missile, TASM. By far the biggest improvement is making the Tomahawk network-centric warfare capable, using data from its multiple sensors, such as aircraft, satellites, foot soldiers, tanks and ships to find its target. The tactical Tomahawk can be reprogrammed in flight to attack one of 16 pre-designated targets, with GPS coordinates stored in its memory or to any other GPS coordinates. Also, the missile can send data about its status back to the commander. It entered service with the Navy in late 2004. Tomahawks are difficult to intercept due to their small size, small radar cross-section and low-altitude flight. The missile is launched and steered for the first few seconds of flight by a solid fuel booster with steering vanes in its exhaust. Then the stubby wings and control surfaces are deployed and the turbofan engine takes over. Over water, the Tomahawk uses inertial guidance to follow a preset course. Once over land, terrain contour matching aids the inertial system. Terminal guidance is provided by the digital scene matching area correlation system, producing a claimed accuracy of about 10 metres. The Kosovo War in 1999 saw HMS Splendid become the first British submarine to fire the Tomahawk in anger.
50 seconds.
The Royal Navy later used them in the 2001 Afghanistan War and Operation Telic, the British contribution to the 2003 Iraq War.
Continue right turn.
The Tomcat was the first fighter to have the remarkable Phoenix missile system. The test operation was called 6 on 6. If the test was successful, the system would prove to be a quantum leap in fighter ability. The objective of the test for the Tomcat's pilot was to attack and down 6 targets simultaneously. The targets included 2 drones that flew at supersonic speed, 3 training aircraft which simulated slower moving targets such as bombers, and another ground-launched drone to imitate a supersonic missile. On the radar, the 6 targets were identified and designated a prefix. From that point on, the pilot just pressed the firing button as the targets became locked on.
One's away. 2's in the air. 3's in the air. 4's in the air. Check the target cameras.
4th missile in the air.
At one time, all 6 missiles were in the air tracking their targets. This was due to the 50-mile range of the Phoenix.
6 in the air.
It was determined after retrieving the test data there were some slight modifications. The Tomcat Phoenix combination would, under combat conditions, give the pilot an 80% hit rate. Firing missiles from planes has always had problems. One of the major problems is the performance of the plane's jet engines when they are caught in the hot exhaust gas of the released missile. Temperature gradients of up to 6,000 degrees Celsius a second can be realised when a missile is fired from an aircraft, and this can severely hamper the aircraft's jets. This is a Eurofighter. When a Eurofighter climbs into the sky, it takes a load of high technology aloft. Its 2 EJ-200 engines give the strike aircraft breathtaking agility and speed. EJ-200s are totally reliable, even when they're caught in the hot exhaust jet of a missile just fired. In a first for a European company, MTU Aero Engines has managed to simulate that situation on the ground, which saves customers much money. MTU's engineers have conceived an innovative test setup to simulate the temperature profiles and gradients involved in missile firing. At the heart of the test arrangement was a specially fabricated hydrogen burner installed in the front of the intake of an EJ-200 production engine at a Munich test stand. The results of over 100 test units witnessed that the EJ-200 proved superbly stable and tolerant of the exhaust gas temperature profiles of rocket engines. An impinging hot exhaust jet puts engines under formidable stress. The searing temperatures may cause an abrupt compressor stall, with the air no longer passing through the engine but being forced in the opposite direction, and the notorious engine surge condition occurs. If the condition is bad enough, a blowout in the combustor results and the engine dies. If it doesn't recover, the pilot has to try and relight it. Previous tests were done in the air. Now they can be simulated in safety and in controlled conditions on the ground. The Eurofighter is the first aircraft to have such an evaluation on its performance while firing missiles, and this has saved the military millions of dollars. That concludes this episode of Sea Power. Join us again when we continue our fascinating journey of discovery of sea power. The history of the specialist amphibious assault craft really begins during World War II. Prior to World War I, amphibious assaults had taken place using conventional boats. The amphibious landings of World War II showed the tremendous costs of this type of operation in the face of modern weapons, especially the machine gun. It was only the recently formed US Marine Corps that saw the need for development of amphibious assault doctrine during the intervening war years. By the late 1930s, concrete plans were beginning to form to build the first really specialised amphibious assault ships. These concepts and vessels were tested in the Pacific and during the coastal invasion of Italy from mid-1943, initially at the port of Salerno and then later Anzio. The assault saw the first uses of the LST, or landing ship tanks, in battle. These vessels allowed for armoured vehicles to be directly dropped onto the shore to provide their offensive power immediately in support of the troop movements. These groups of specialised shipping can be divided into two types, basically described as ships and craft. In general, the ships carry the troops from the point of origin to the drop point for the assault, and the craft carry the troops from the ship to the shore. Generally, amphibious assaults take place over short distances, though they can also involve the shore-to-shore technique, where landing craft go directly from the origin to the assault point. The landing ship tank stands out as a significant technological leap. As the name suggests, it is a specialised type for getting tanks ashore. Unlike the other larger shipping, LSTs could beach and discharge directly onto shore. The tank landing ship was created and refined during World War II to support amphibious operations by carrying significant quantities of vehicles, cargo and troops directly onto an unimproved shore. More than 1,000 of these ships were laid down in the United States during World War II. From their combat debut in the Solomon Islands in June 1943 until the end of hostilities in August 1945, the LSTs performed a vital service in World War II. They participated in the invasions of Sicily, Italy, Normandy and southern France in the European theatre, and were an essential element in the island-hopping campaigns in the Pacific, which culminated in the liberation of the Philippines and the capture of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Throughout the war, LSTs demonstrated a remarkable capacity to absorb punishment and survive. Despite an irreverent large slow target badge, which was applied to them by crew members, the LSTs suffered relatively few losses in relation to their numbers and operations. Of 1,051 actually constructed, only 26 were lost due to enemy action, and 13 were the victims of weather, reef or accident. The Marines were also the first to demand a tracked amphibious tank to support their landings. Previously, armoured vehicles were required to be fitted with flotation equipment in order to reach shore. The Alligator series of fully tracked and armoured vehicles first saw action in the landings at Guadalcanal in 1942. and was still in use during the Okinawa landings at the end of the Pacific War in 1945. Subsequent development over the years saw the Alligator develop into the current amphibious assault vehicle, AAV, designation AAV-7A1, formerly LVT-7. The AAV-7A1 is a fully tracked amphibious landing vehicle manufactured by FMC Corporation and is the current amphibious troop transport of the United States Marine Corps and is also operated by other forces of many nations. It is used by the USMC amphibious assault battalions to land the surface assault elements and their equipment in a single lift, and to conduct mechanised operations and combat support in the subsequent armoured operations ashore. The first Gators had a land speed of 25 miles per hour, though their water skills were a little disappointing, in that the water speed was only 2.5 miles per hour. Today's AAV has a top speed of 45 miles per hour on land and 8.2 miles per hour in water. The water propulsion is provided by two water jet thrusters positioned at the rear of the vehicle. These are diverted to achieve steerage. When the vehicles approach the beach, the propulsion is automatically shifted from the jets to the tracks, and the LVTs are immediately underway at full speed. Once the area has been reached, the hydraulic rear door is lowered and the Marines dismount to attack their objective. After the mission requirements, the AAV-7s return to the ships. Inside the dock, the controller guides the AAV onto the ramp and into the bay. The batsman is not dissimilar to the batsman on World War II aircraft carriers, using glowing batons to mark their approach adjustments. These batons are necessary in bright daylight from the gloom of the inside of the vessel's dock. Once the AAV is inside the docking ship, it is rotated on the turntable and then stored and replenished, ready for its next mission. Many systems on the LVT-7 are reaching the end of their useful life and will require replacement. The new Advanced Assault Amphibious Vehicle, AAAV, is in the development phase currently and is anticipated to be testing in 2006 and in full operating capability by 2012. The new AAAV will have a maximum speed on land of 45 miles per hour and water of 25 knots, achieved with retractable bow and chine planning flaps. During World War II, the experiences learnt in the field were well remembered in later operations. The extensive landings in occupied France during the D-Day assaults were almost brought undone, not by the opposing forces, but by the weather. In spite of extensive planning, the largest storm to hit the English Channel in 80 years caused more damage to the forces and actually threatened to derail the whole invasion. It was quickly appreciated that amphibious assaults were such complicated operations that a specialised flagship was needed, with facilities that a normal naval vessel simply could not provide. It was also realised that battleships, cruisers and destroyers could not necessarily provide all the fire support that an assault would need. Therefore, specialised shipping was developed that incorporated various direct and indirect fire weapons. These included guns and rockets. As part of the final barrage before an assault, the landing area would be plastered by these types of weapons. Then, small landing ships would ferry the men ashore in their thousands, along with jeeps and tanks. The men would board via scaling ladders after the craft had been launched. The landing craft then formed their holding pattern until the whole fleet was ready for the advance. In the meantime, the fire support from larger guns continued. These large American LCU 1610 landing craft vessels have both bow and stern ramps for onload and offload at either end, and can be linked bow to stern to create a temporary pier-like structure. Capable of carrying up to 400 Marines or 170 tons of cargo, here they are carrying older M48 and M60 tanks for armoured assault. Similar forces are maintained by many nations, where the Royal Navy are training with NATO in the region of Norway, which leads to the Balkans. The landing craft in use are so rugged they are capable of returning to English shores on their own in 36 hours. As well as LCUs and LCDs, the force also used Sea King helicopters in the assault and rescue role. These war games showed their worth when they were called on during the Falkland Campaign in 1982. The well decks aboard assault ships HMS Fearless and Intrepid can be flooded to allow the 4 LCUs to be launched or retrieved with their armoured cargo. The troops were dispatched from the 9 Sea King helicopters from HMS Invincible, the Harrier aircraft carrier. Once on dry land, the Marines then proceeded on a long march to the airfield at Port Stanley. Despite all the progress that was seen during World War II, there were still fundamental limitations in the types of coastline that were suitable for assault. Beaches had to be relatively free of obstacles and have the right tidal conditions and the correct slope. However, the development of the helicopter changed the equation fundamentally. The first use of helicopters in an amphibious assault came during the Anglo-French invasion of Egypt in 1956. The techniques were developed further by American forces in the Vietnam War and refined during training exercises. Today, the modern amphibious assault can take place at virtually any point of any coast, making defending against them extremely difficult. One of the most recent innovations is the LCAC, or Landing Craft Air Cushion. These large hovercraft greatly expand the range and conditions under which an amphibious assault can take place. Capable of operating from existing and future well-deck ships, they are used to transport everything available to the assault force, from ship to shore and across the beach. There are numerous advantages of air-cushioned landing craft. They can carry heavy payloads up to 75 tonnes, which easily allows for existing assault armoured vehicles. Existing landing craft have a top speed of only 8 knots, and the LCAC are capable of in excess of 40 knots at full load. Their payload and speed mean more forces reach the shore in shorter time, with shorter intervals between trips. The LCAC, like all hovercraft, rides on a cushion of air. The air is supplied to the cushion by 4 centrifugal fans driven by the craft's gas turbine engines. The air is enclosed by a flexible skirt system. No portion of the LCAC hull structure penetrates the water surface. The entire hull rides approximately 4 feet above the surface. Traditional landing craft with their top speed of 8 knots could only cross 17% of the world's beaches, and assaults were made from 1 to 2 miles offshore. The capabilities of the LCAC make more than 80% of the world's coastlines accessible to assault forces from well beyond the horizon. Its high speed complements a joint assault with helicopters, so personnel and equipment can be unloaded beyond the beach in secure landing areas. For 20 years, helicopters have provided the partial capability to launch over-the-horizon amphibious assaults. Now, with LCACs, landing craft complement helos in speed and tactical surprise, without exposing ships to enemy fire. LCAC is a dramatic innovation in modern amphibious warfare technology. It provides the capability to launch amphibious assaults from points over the horizon. thereby decreasing the risk to ships and personnel and generating greater uncertainty in the enemy's mind as to the location and timing of an assault, thereby maximising its prospects of success. It is also important to point out the LCAC propulsion system makes it less susceptible to mines and other assault craft or vehicles. The LCAC vessels are deployed from the LHA Tarawa class and newer LHD Wasp class assault ships. These new ships, a cross of aircraft carrier and assault ship, are capable of carrying 2 of the larger LCU traditional landing craft or 3 of the newer LCACs, which would supply up to 60 of the AAV amphibious assault vehicles. This class has become the specialised ships that are required to meet the specific demands of the assault forces. They are designed with facilities that a normal naval vessel simply could not provide. Not only do this class provide transport and a base of operations, but also the air support required for their specialist missions. Their air component covers a mix of up to 18 Sea Knight and Sea Stallion helicopters, Super Copper attack helicopters and anti-submarine warfare helicopters. The air defence and shore attack roles are also filled by the ageing AV-8B Harrier attack planes. The Harrier's ability to work from small ships and small clearings on land make them perfect for the tactical support of the assault forces. The AV-8's remarkable abilities proved their worth during the Falkland Island campaigns for the Royal Navy. The tiny jet flew attack and support sorties from carriers in weather conditions that would have grounded any other attack jet of its day. The replacement for the Harrier is a new thoroughbred fighter from Lockheed, the JSF, or Joint Strike Fighter. The JSF is being built in 3 variants for varying roles. A conventional takeoff and landing aircraft, CTOL, for the US Air Force, a carrier-based variant, CV, for the US Navy, and a short takeoff and vertical landing, STOVL, aircraft for the US Marine Corps and the Royal Navy. This aircraft was developed to take over the Harrier's role. So far, the JSF has commitments from the US Air Force, the US Navy, the US Marine Corps and the British Royal Navy. Pilots flying the F-35B STOVL version will particularly appreciate the smarts of the F-35. The pilot simply flies the plane with stick and throttle, with the software handling the intricacies of short takeoff. The pilot receives inputs from the F-35's electronic systems using an advanced cockpit layout and receives his visuals via a helmet-mounted display being developed by Vision Systems International. The performance of the F-35 matches and in some areas exceeds many of today's top guns. But the F-35 goes several steps beyond any of the top guns with stealth capability, increased range on internal fuel tanks, and it has state-of-the-art avionics. These features improve the operational effectiveness, supportability and survivability of the aircraft. The variant for use by the US Marines and the Royal Navy is perhaps the most exciting of the F-35 family. Like the Harrier jump jet, the Joint Strike Fighter has the ability to stop and hover in mid-air for vertical landings. Currently, the US Marine Corps and the British Navy use the Harrier to drop into locations where paved landing strips are short or unavailable. The Harrier has supplied a remarkable service over 3 decades, but it has some shortcomings. Engine exhaust from a Harrier's underbelly vents can kick up large pieces of material that can get sucked into the aircraft's intake, and this virtually chokes the engine. To improve on the Harrier system, Lockheed engineers fitted a lift fan just behind the cockpit. During flight, the fan is aerodynamically hidden behind closed doors that swivel open for landing. The jet's engine turns a drive shaft, similar to a car's drive shaft that spins the fan and pushes cool air from above the plane out below. This column of cool air increases the fighter's balance as it moves downwards and keeps dangerous engine exhaust away from the plane's air intake. The lift fan generates nearly 20,000 pounds of lifting power, and the downward vectored rear exhaust supplies an equivalent amount. The US Navy has ordered another variant of the F-35 for its carriers. Due to the large size of their ships, they didn't require STOVL, so they opted for a version similar to the A model. The most notable difference is that the carrier version has a larger wingspan. However, due to the small size of the British aircraft carriers and the fact that they are set up for Harrier jump jets, the British have ordered the STOVL version of the F-35. The cost of the plane is one of the reasons why the JSF F-35 has been widely accepted, but it is the projected operating costs that are also a consideration for buyers. The most current data predicts the JSF F-35 will cost 40 to 50% less to operate and support than today's Top Gun planes. Time has proven that amphibious assaults are the hardest of all military operations to coordinate. Their requirements of such fine control and large degree of coordination means that it is only the more substantial military powers that have the ability to successfully attempt them, let alone exhibit any true presence in the realm of sea power.
And there's a kick.
Military units from access countries arrange exercises that permit the units to test new equipment, procedures, and round off the training of both the young men and women of their forces. Exercise Ocean Protector is one such training arrangement between Australia and New Zealand. It is a combined maritime exercise that brings together naval and maritime air force units from both countries. It is one of Australia's major exercises and is held annually. A huge number of training programs are arranged on each vessel to test every department's ability to operate under pressure. From rescue crews and medical crews through to the weapon systems and machinery of each vessel, all components are pushed to the limit in such exercises as Ocean Protector. Today you will find both men and women working together on board Australian war vessels. Many other countries also include women in various roles on board fighting ships. Almost 2,000 personnel from Australia and New Zealand come together to let the young men and women practice and test their core warfighting skills in an exercise scenario off the Australian coast. Exercise Ocean Protector involves a range of training serials to develop and test maritime war fighting. Key training serials involve mariner exercises, aviation operations, general warfare and submarine operations. Ocean Protector is the lead-up exercise for the larger combined maritime exercise, Exercise Tasman. which test the collaborative warfighting skills of Australia and New Zealand. In some events, New Zealand and Australia have been joined by warships of the French Navy. This has brought a further 3 ships and 1,124 officers and sailors into the arena. Even before the Australian ships entered the designated games area, training had begun. Sailors at action stations clad in bulletproof vest fired rounds from .50 and .40 calibre guns. The 4-inch cannons also got a workout. The firing of these guns ensured accuracy and mechanical reliability were up to scratch. Representing the Royal Australian Navy were the vessels Brisbane, Anzac, Arunta, Melbourne, Huon and Norman. New Zealand was represented by Takaha, while the corvette Vendémiaire represented the French interests of the South Pacific. This fleet concentration period saw the ships drill in keeping sea lanes free of mines, enemy ships and marauding aircraft. These exercises are the focal point of constant training and provide the crews with as close to real-life situations as possible. Incoming RNZAF Skyhawks and RAAF Hornets tested the vessel's anti-aircraft defence abilities, and the exercise gives the whole crew the opportunity to pit themselves against such a threat. In such exercises, the radar operators and weapons system specialists are put under enormous pressure, as failure during an exercise represents the loss of not only the vessels, but the loss of many of their colleagues and friends' lives. The crew react to situations with both offensive actions and defensive actions. The Skyhawk is an aged aircraft, and production of this model ceased in 1975. However, a total of 2,960 aircraft have been built. The New Zealand aircraft were extensively upgraded and could fire modern missiles and had good warfare capability. As a mark of their true worth, the Skyhawk still flies with some of the air forces of the world, nearly 50 years after first entering service. In its long lifespan as a low-level fighter attack aircraft, the A4 could boast capabilities needed to match almost any conceivable circumstance. After proving itself for almost half a century, the A4 Skyhawk has more than just proven its worth. It has become one of the finest military planes ever made. Today, the Skyhawk is used mainly as a training aircraft. In Dissimilar Air Combat Training, DACT. It served in that role until 1999, when the last were replaced with the T-45 Goshawk. Australia's F-18 Hornet is a modern all-weather fighter aircraft and attack aircraft. Designed in the 1970s, it is in service with the US Navy and US Marine Corps, as well as several other nations. It fills the roles of fighter escort, fleet air defence, suppression of enemy air defences, SEAD, interdiction, close and deep air support, reconnaissance and forward air control. Its versatility and reliability have proven it to be a valuable asset of the Australian Defence Force. Another exercise is Fincastle. The Royal Australian Submarine Fleet consists of Collins-class vessels. They replaced the highly successful Oberon class. The Oberons were arguably the best conventional submarine class of its time, with an astonishing reputation for quietness that allowed it to exist into the 21st century. The ability of the O-boats to run in total silence enabled Australian submarines to successfully attack USS Enterprise in a training exercise, despite a huge number of supporting ships protecting it.
Full dive in the planes, 75 feet back to 52. 75 back to 52.
The Collins class is now used in exercise Fincastle, which is an exercise that hones the fighting skills and involves Australian, English and New Zealand Air Forces. Canada also often participates. This exercise is in fact a competition that has been in existence since 1961 and is probably one of the longest running military competitions in the world. This keenly contested competition tests the participants' ability to detect, classify, track and engage a submarine. In this case, they search for an Australian Collins-class boat.
Mast flooded, mast vent shut.
Mast flooded, vent valve shut.
The Australians use the P3 Orion and the English favour the hunting abilities of the Nimrod. Today, the P3 is still very busy, as it is a peerless airborne hunter. Its reputation as the ultimate submarine finder was achieved through more than 35 years of service, from the Cuban Missile Crisis to round-the-clock low-profile patrols throughout the Cold War. It is remarkably well adapted for maritime patrol in the post-Cold War world. The P3 can be outfitted with a variety of sophisticated detection equipment. It is one of the most modern eyes in the sky and as deadly to a modern submarine as a hawk is to a rodent. The British counterpart of the Lockheed Orion is the Nimrod, which entered service in 1969. Based on the Comet 4, the Nimrod was and remains the only jet-powered long-range maritime patrol aircraft in military service, offering the advantages of speed and height in transit, while still capable of long on-task periods, and in particular stealth in the anti-submarine warfare role. As most propeller-driven maritime patrol aircraft make a discrete resonance that is easily detectable by submerged submarines, the Nimrod, with jet engines and associated jet noise, is virtually undetectable. This is the 2003 exercise, which was won by the Australian contingent. The following exercise was won by the RAF. Points are given for detecting the submarine and extra points for localisation, tracking and making a simulated attack. The crews of each nation flew 2 sorties over the 2-day period, trying to detect, localise and attack the submarine. Although Fincastle is a submarine hunting competition, the value of the exercise to the submariner cannot be understated, as it gives the crew the chance to physically experience the stress of being hunted down by 2 of the deadliest sub-hunters in the world, the Orion and Nimrod. What the crews learn here may one day save their lives. So it could be argued that no other sport in the world would be as acutely contested as events such as Fincastle and Ocean Protector. It is interesting to note that Australia has won the Fincastle Trophy 13 times. Training exercises such as Fincastle and Ocean Protector are the grounding for real operations, such as the assignment designated Operation Catalyst. This is 2003, and the Australian Defence Force had about 800 personnel serving in the Middle East under this assignment. In the Persian Gulf, the guided missile frigate HMAS Melbourne and its 230 crew helped to protect the Al Basra offshore oil terminal, which is a vital terminal that earns more than $100 million a day for the Iraqi economy. It is of great importance to the recovering country, and the coalition forces are ensuring that this asset remains free from terrorist attack. HMAS Melbourne was enforcing an exclusion zone around the Iraqi oil terminal to protect it from both sea and air attack. The Melbourne was also assigned the duty of preventing illegitimate oil being run by smugglers. This consists of crude oil and processed oil that's coming out of the country without the required and appropriate paperwork. Members of the former Iraqi regime transiting through the area and weapons of any sort that may be used by the resistance are also high priority during onboard searches. This vessel is one of the 228 operational boardings and 503 queries of a range of vessels including oil tankers, traditional dhows and passenger ferries. The crew is held under armed guard in the mess while the boarding team checks its cargo and papers. The vessel is thoroughly inspected and the senior crew are interviewed. If anything suspect is found, specialists are brought on board to determine the outcome of the investigation. This vessel's cargo and papers check out, so after an hour, the boarding party moves on. While one of Melbourne's tasks is intercepting smugglers, its main priority is protecting the legitimate oil trade by ensuring the safe passage through the Gulf by legitimate vessels. HMAS Melbourne spent 90 days on station, while conducting maritime intercept operations in the North Arabian Gulf and the protection of Iraqi oil platforms. Apart from protecting the national shoreline of Australia, the Royal Australian Navy is always the first to assist victims of natural disaster. In this instance, the men and women crew of Canimbla put the vessel to use in helping the recent tsunami sufferers. More than 106,000 Indonesians died in the tsunami and the earthquake that preceded it. On the 30th of December 2004, the Australian government committed the transport ship HMAS Canimbla and an Army Engineer detachment to aid in the recovery and reconstruction of communities devastated by the Boxing Day tsunami in Indonesia. Once on station, Canimbla provided the local people with a range of facilities including medical, accommodation and communications. HMAS Canimbla was the first of 2 LPAs commissioned into the Royal Australian Navy. A major part of Canimbla's outfitting is a most comprehensive medical facility. Canimbla was the perfect asset to send to Indonesia in the wake of the tsunami. Lying in the serene green waters of Banda Aceh, the vessel's tank deck was crammed with trucks, bulldozers and graders. Also on board were 400 Army engineers who aimed to rebuild the ruined infrastructure of the city. HMAS Canimbla's 2 heavy lift Sea King helicopters from 817 were also sent to aid 3 smaller Australian Army helicopters already flying relief missions to refugees. The job of Canimbla's crew was to assist in immediate post-disaster relief work, to stabilise the situation and to remove health hazards. The Australian focus was on the restoration of water and power, as well as wreckage clearance from Banda Aceh's ruined coastal zone. This is not the first time the Armed Forces of Australia have assisted in relief missions. During 1998, the sea wiped out remote villages in sand dunes in Papua New Guinea. And that concludes this episode of Sea Power. Post-World War I, in a series of fleet problems, the early carriers demonstrated their effectiveness when they proved their enthusiasts' theories conclusively. In 1928, fleet carrier Langley totally surprised the installations at Pearl Harbor and theoretically achieved significant damage to the area. 1 year later, the larger carriers proved the same result, with conclusive results again around the Panama Canal. These results were repeated in the years up until World War II in the many trials conducted. Broadly, the results forced the battle groups to begin taking the carrier as a more significant threat to themselves and the outcome of the encounters. These exercises proved their worth in the coming years, with the commanders gaining valuable practice and the crews and pilots honing the skills they would need in the dark years to come. The development of these skills began at the turn of the century with the early concepts of manned flight. By 1909, we were barely able to claim mastery of building petrol-driven four-wheel vehicles, or cars as they became known. Yet some forward thinkers were already adapting the internal combustion engine to powering aircraft. In Virginia, during one of the Wright brothers' subsequent flights of their Kitty Hawk, a naval observer, Lieutenant George Sweet, remarked that the Navy must have that. It will be most important to us. With these words, Sweet basically instigated the joining of air power and naval power. The Navy's first attempts at air power concentrated on taking off and landing on water. In 1910 in Virginia, a civilian pilot named Eugene Healy tested the idea of taking off from a ship and landing on terra firma. He used a wooden ramp built over the bow of a cruiser as a runway for a 50 horsepower Curtiss. He was successful, and 2 months later he attempts the reverse, taking off on land and touching down on a ship. The next achievement towards aircraft and their use at sea occurred in 1921, when the US Navy ran bombing tests on captured ships. Brigadier General Billy Mitchell oversaw the operation. The newspapers were quick to announce that with such a weapon as the plane, the day the battleship was over. The Navy was quick to remind the media and people that the battleship used in the test was a sitting duck. It did not return fire or in any way take defensive action. Directly after the Great War, the world's major navies were to show great enthusiasm in the promise embodied in the airplane. The successful flight of the NC-4 flying boat in May 1919 achieved the first crossing of the Atlantic by air. Just prior to the transatlantic flight, the US Atlantic Fleet began training with their own aviation detachment. Biplanes were launched off a wooden deck erected on the battleship Texas. In a great leap forward during July 1919, the US Navy ordered the Collier Jupiter to be converted into the US Navy's first aircraft carrier. By 1922, the Collier's transformation was complete and had become America's first aircraft carrier. She was rechristened USS Langley. Arresting wires were strung across the deck of the runway, and planes were fitted with hooks which would catch the wires and bring the plane to a halt. The first of many problems became apparent. The undercarriages of the planes were simply not strong enough to cope with the rough landings. The strong and lightweight metals of today, such as titanium or materials such as carbon fibre, were not yet available. So strengthening came at a cost, and the cost was weight. However, some remedies were simple enough and made enough difference to prove that using planes from the Langley was feasible. These included designing planes that gave pilots better visibility over the nose of the plane to give them better judgment when landing, the track of the undercarriage to increase stability, and better training procedures. The British were also developing sea takeoffs, and this was one idea, the laying down of a buoyant runway, which was not overly successful. The British returned to the more conventional aircraft carrier, and the same problems as the Americans. Many Vought planes found their way into the Navy's service. Among the models were twin-seat observation planes and float planes, but it was the fighter version that was to establish the company's association with the US Navy. On October 17, 1922, it was a VE-7 that took off for the first time from the decks from the US Navy's original aircraft carrier, the Langley. This marked the long and at times daunting development phase of naval aviation. The requirements for naval aircraft are much more encompassing and demanding than those planes destined for land-based assignment. A pilot requires very good visibility and a tough plane to withstand carrier landings. Because the gap between a landing and a crashing is very narrow, pilots continued to force their planes onto the deck trying to attain a hookup. Early on in the development of carrier aircraft, the Navy filmed many equipment failures. These films stand as a record of the problems that were overcome by the Vought engineers in their achievements of the VE-7 and its subsequent models. Many models after the VE-7 were submitted to the military, although none were taken up in the fighter role. One of the reconnaissance series of these aircraft were called the Corsair. In 1922, the Washington Naval Reduction Treaty was signed to halt the battleship's arms race, which was threatening to bankrupt entire countries. When the United States signed the treaty, they agreed to halt construction of the 13 new battleships and battlecruisers being built. Two of these hulls went on to become the largest aircraft carriers in the world, the Lexington and Saratoga, and the rest were scrapped. In 1928, the US operated her 3 carriers. These 3 ships allowed the development of concepts and trials in the new theories of naval air warfare. The 3 ships were trialled as task groups and task forces in many and varied hypothetical situations. It soon became obvious that the larger carriers, Saratoga CV-3 and Lexington CV-2, would be significantly more capable than originally thought. In a series of fleet problems, the carriers demonstrated their effectiveness when they proved their enthusiast theories conclusively. In 1928, fleet carrier Langley totally surprised the installations at Pearl Harbor and theoretically achieved significant damage to the area. 1 year later, the large carriers proved the same result, with conclusive results again around the Panama Canal. In Fleet Problem 9 in January 1929, the Saratoga and 1 escort were intentionally separated from the main battle group and launched a surprise strike against the Panama Canal, theoretically disabling it and dividing the world in half. The success of the strike marked the birth of the Air Carrier Task Force. The subsequent refining of the concept became the carrier attack groups that would roam the Pacific during World War II. The Yorktown-class aircraft carriers were built not long before World War II. The first 2 ships, Yorktown CV-5 and Enterprise CV-6, were commissioned in 1937 and 1938. After the devastation of Pearl Harbor, the balance of the Pacific conflict fell to the US aircraft carriers. The following 6 months saw a holding action against the Imperial forces, with sporadic minor raids battle training the forces of the Allied nations. The inspiring Doolittle raid on Tokyo forced the Imperial Navy into choosing to fight in both the Central and Southern Pacific before the entire American economy and resources could be brought to bear. It was the planes from the aircraft carriers Saratoga and Lexington that would be the first to change the way sea battles would be fought in the future. The location of the initial battles was north of Australia in the Coral Sea. For the first time in history, a sea battle was fought entirely by aircraft. A Japanese force was rounding the north of New Guinea to capture Port Moresby. If they were successful, they would have a platform to invade Australia. The battle was fierce and losses on both sides were severe. The Yorktown's flight deck received 1 hit from an aircraft bomb but survived. The Lexington, however, took 3 hits and sank that night. A destroyer and an oiler were also lost. The Japanese lost a carrier with another damaged. Only a month after the Coral Sea, Japanese codes were broken and the information was devastating for the Americans. It was learned that Admiral Yamamoto was planning a massive attack on the strategically valuable Midway Islands in the Central Pacific. This battle was to become known historically as the Battle of Midway. The odds for the Americans seemed overwhelming. They had no battleships and the Japanese had 9. 8 American cruisers against a force of 15 Japanese cruisers. The American carriers, the Hornet, Yorktown and Enterprise, were to face 4 Japanese carriers. However, the US Navy had one advantage, and that was surprise. The Japanese were unaware of the American carriers, and when the planes started their attack, the Japanese were caught with flight decks packed with planes, fuel and high explosive bombs. In the commotion, they could not get their planes into the air quickly enough. When the battle is over, all the Japanese carriers and 1 cruiser is on the bottom. The Americans fared better, but still lost their carrier Yorktown with more than 100 aircraft. It was the second time that aircraft had been a major force in a sea battle, and now the pressure was on to develop planes specifically for carrier work. June 26, 1942, just after the Battle of Midway, a new plane rolls out from the Grumman aircraft factory. Some people interpreted the plane as the Grumman Wildcat's big brother, but this was not so. This was a totally new fighter. The plane was designed to even the score against the remarkable Japanese Mitsubishi Zero. The Zero had for some time been the gunfighter in the sky over the Pacific. The Hellcat was about to challenge this air superiority. The Hellcat was primarily designed to be used on carriers, although a few were flown from land bases. The Hellcats were deployed firstly to the larger carriers like the new Essex class. The USS Essex CV-9 itself was over 60 feet long, nearly 10 feet wider and more than a third heavier than the Yorktowns. As a mark of their worth, none of the Essex-class carriers were lost, and two of them, Franklin CV-13 and Bunker Hill CV-17, came home under their own power even after being grievously damaged. On April 5, 1943, a Hellcat squadron downed the first Zero, and this was the way it would be for the remainder of the war. During June 1944, the Hellcat broke the back of the Japanese Zero. This was the battle which was described by one American pilot as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By the day's end, the Japanese had lost 356 planes. The Allies had lost just 16. It was one of the highest American kill ratios in a single day. It was only the Hellcat's ability to take the fight to the Zero that allowed the Pacific theatre to be secured by the Allies. The Hellcat's battle ratio of 19-1 saw that of 6,477 Japanese planes downed over the Pacific, well over 5,000 are credited to Hellcats. During the same period, the Voight Company had developed their concept of a carrier fighter. The differences in the design philosophies between the extremely successful Hellcat and the new Corsair I saw the Hellcat make some performance sacrifices to achieve safer carrier landings at slower speeds, whereas the Corsair was designed to be a carrier plane, but performance was its prime objective. The new F-4U Corsair I became America's first 400-mile-an-hour fighter. Unfortunately, its performance caused questions over the Corsair's safety and led to it only being assigned to land-based operations initially. It was the units obtained by the British Fleet Air Arm that swayed the US Navy into re-evaluating and accepting the F-4U for their carriers. The English had a long history with aircraft carriers and their opinions were well respected. Quickly, the British pilots came to truly appreciate the performance of their Corsairs. With some modification to the landing gear to reduce the bounce and the adoption of a curving approach on landing to maintain the pilot's visibility, the F-4Us went into operation. One other modification was required, removing 4 inches off each wing for storage, so as to fit below decks on the small English escort carriers. The American Marines based at the newly acquired Henderson Field on Guadalcanal had to fight stiff Japanese opposition to maintain their hold in the area. With battle damage, the primitive conditions and an unfinished airstrip, Henderson Field was soon littered with damaged aircraft. On the 12th of February, the Marines received their first F-4Us, and on the first day, most pilots logged over 9 hours in action. From the British results and the enthusiastic reviews of the Marines of the Pacific, the US Navy began retesting the F-4U in April 1944, and they were eventually cleared for carrier service. This proved timely as the Japanese war machine was now employing the desperate kamikaze operations, and the Corsair's power was sorely needed. During the course of the Pacific campaigns, the Corsairs maintained a loss ratio of over 11 to 1, an impressive legacy even by today's standards. The end of the war coincided with the crossroads in engine technologies. The new jet engines were in, and propellers were old hat. As a mark of their abilities, the Marines and Navy kept their F4Us when most of the other models were simply scrapped. Comparing the planes of the day against the new Phantom, the Corsair was only 30 miles an hour slower, but had almost twice the range and could carry significantly more load. This would prove to be a wise choice, with the Korean Peninsula only a short period away. With their large load capacity and very accurate close in-ground support, the Corsairs tied up most of the Chinese transport and supply needs. The combination of American aircraft and their carriers gave the US and their allies virtual air supremacy. The Marines' efforts in Korea shine with the merits of the Corsair. The planes handled the extremely basic conditions on the matted strips with ease. The cold, though, was another matter. With the weather this extreme, the planes simply froze up. Even the Chinese could do little when it was this cold. As a mark of their worth, during the first 10 months of the war, the Corsairs flew 82% of the close-in tactical support missions. One squadron flew over 1,100 missions in a month. In English aircraft, this period also had a parallel development from their Hawker Typhoons and Tempests to their pinnacle, the Sea Furies. The climax of the line was the FB-11 Sea Fury, fitted with a Centaurus XV rotary engine outputting 2,550 horsepower. The Sea Fury was an outstanding aircraft, a tough customer in the attack role, but with light and responsive controls and excellent performance. While the F4U was built heavier to suit the thoughts of the time, the FB-11s were actually a lighter version of their Typhoon and Tempest forebears. These Hawker models used both inline and rotary engines and became very powerful, formidable aircraft. Today, few examples of these outstanding aircraft remain for the enthusiast to experience. Even fewer are in flying condition. Not surprisingly, both the Sea Fury and the Corsair have proven to be favourites with aircraft restorers. These Sea Furies were flown in Australia's island state of Tasmania in a recent air show and pylon race. The performance of these planes even today makes them an inspiring sight. Their classic shapes and throaty engines always draw large crowds in the hope of seeing a piece of classic aeronautic history. During the Korean War, there are a small number of reports of the two propeller planes attacking MiG-15 jets. One was of 8 MiGs trying to outturn 4 FB-11 Sea Furies. The result was a loss of 2 jets to the propeller-driven plane's cannons. 2 other MiGs were damaged, while the Sea Furies returned safely to their carrier. The era of a propeller fighter being launched from the rolling deck of an aircraft carrier continued up until the Vietnam War. They were superseded by the technological advances of the computer and the missile. The images seem to conjure romantic notions of sacrifice and honour, mixed strangely with the horror of war and the sadness of loss.